In my last video, I went over the definition of leadership. In this video, I am going to expand on that discussion by answering three specific questions. One, is there a difference between leadership and management? These are terms that are often used in the literature. So is there a difference between these two terms, or are they same? Leaders versus managers. Second, what is effective leadership? We now know what leadership is, but how can we say that a leader is being effective? We need to gain some clarity about it. So that's the second question. And finally, I will discuss some of the key variables that come up in leadership theories. I will also briefly touch upon the different types of leadership theories that we will go over in this course. As I mentioned in my last video, there are hundreds or maybe even thousands of definitions of leadership, which makes things very confusing, right? So after analyzing all those definitions, in my field, we have come to the conclusion that leadership is the process of influencing others to achieve common goals. Of course, I have elaborated on this definition. But one thing that I want to re-emphasize is that we came to this conclusion and discarded those hundreds of other definitions because all those other definitions were seeing leadership from a very narrow perspective. Some define leadership as inspiring others, which it certainly is. Some defined leadership as guiding others. Some defined it in terms of directing others. Some define leadership as the process of giving rewards and punishments to influence, people's behavior. Those are all right, but they are very narrow perspectives of leadership. When we are giving some inspirational speech, when we are directing our followers to do this, do that, whatever, any kind of direction, when we are guiding them, when we are giving rewards, when we are giving punishment, when we are facilitating the interaction process, when we are connecting with them at an emotional level, when we are providing them with the resources so that they can succeed, we are ultimately trying to influence them, right? So that's the key thing to remember. Leadership ultimately boils down to influencing others. So it is important to have this clarity in your mind. The means that you employ to influence others may vary, but ultimately the objective is that you are influencing others to accomplish some goal. So that's the clarity that you need to have about what leadership is. Now, I am re-emphasizing this in this video because it has implications to the questions that I had asked you about the difference between leadership and management, and also the second question about what is effective leadership. Now, let's quickly go through a couple more definitions from different textbooks. The first definition is from Hughes, Jennett, and Curfey textbook on leadership. And herein you see that leadership is defined as the process of influencing an organized group toward accomplishing its goals. What do you think about this definition? You can pause the video here and analyze the definition. Well, there are a lot of positive aspects of this definition. It does emphasize that it's an influence process. It does emphasize that it's a group phenomenon as well, because the leader is influencing group. And it also emphasizes the third component of leadership, which is that it's goal directed, right? But there is a problem as well. And the problem is that it limits leadership to only organized groups. That is a little problematic, right? Leadership sure happens in organized setups, but leadership can also happen in completely unorganized environments, right? We see a similar problem in this next definition from another textbook, where a leader is defined as a person who influences individuals and groups within an organization, helps them establish goals and guides them toward achievement of those goals, thereby allowing them to be effective. So, yes, it is true that a leader is a person who influences others, individuals and groups, but it need not be within an organization, right? I'm sure you have all seen leadership outside formal organizations. Leadership can happen in completely informal, unorganized environments. Now, this definition goes into some specific ways of influencing by establishing goals, guiding, but those are, as I mentioned in my previous slide, different means through which we influence. And that can be a long list of things that you can do to influence your followers. We don't necessarily have to include all those things. Leadership ultimately boils down to influencing others. Anyway, the key point here is that leadership need not happen only in organized environments. It can happen also in informal, unorganized environments. This brings me to the idea of two different types of leaders. One is an assigned leader. Who is an assigned leader? An assigned leader is a person who has been appointed to the position of leadership. Okay, so your manager may appoint you as the supervisor of the floor. So you become the assigned leader. Clear? Or through in a job selection process, you may get appointed to the position of the deputy manager or the divisional manager of a factory floor. So these are all examples of assigned leadership. You will see assigned leadership only in organized environments. But we also have another type of leader, and that leader is called an emergent leader. Who is an emergent leader? An emergent leader is a person who emerges as a leader in an informal, unorganized group. This person emerges as a leader. No one has appointed this person to be in the leadership position. The best way to think about it probably would be, there are many of those TV shows, right, where you are thrown into some island with a group of people and you have to survive. The TV show Survivor, right? Now, or more similar such shows. There are probably many such shows. A bunch of people are put together in a novel situation. No one is assigned to take the leading role in those groups, right? It's usually one person who emerges as a leader because of probably that person's personality or certain skills that person may have, or whatever is the reason. But we see sometimes, especially in this unorganized, informal kind of setups, a person emerging as a leader. People are willing to follow this person not because somebody has appointed him into this position of leadership, but people feel that this person has the necessary qualities to lead them effectively. That is the reason people are willing to follow this person. So that's what we mean by emergent leader. Emergent leader can, of course, also happen in formal organizations. But two different types of leaders: assigned leader and emergent leader. Now that we have gone through the definition of leadership in great detail, let's go through a quick quiz kind of thing. Would you call this person a leader? The coach. Yes, because he is influencing the players, right? Would you call Hitler a leader? Now, this may be a little controversial, but by definition, yes, he would be a leader. He may have been a bad leader, some of you say. He may have been an unethical leader, is what you may argue. And those arguments would be completely fair, but he did influence people. There were thousands of people who were willing to sacrifice their lives, who were in complete awe of him, right? So he was influencing people. So he is a leader. Are they leaders? Now, depending on your political alignment, you may think, oh, if you are a Democrat, you may think, oh, Trump is not a leader. Or if you are a Republican, you may think, oh, Clinton, she is not a leader. I mean, jokes apart. But they are both leaders, right? But the question is, are they leading? Here, the answer is no. Yes, they have been in positions of leadership. But right now, they are eating. They are not leading. So, as I said, leadership is the process of influencing others to attain some common goal. Leadership is like swimming in that case. You may be a swimmer, but you are not always swimming, right? That's how you need to think about leadership. You may be a leader, but you are not always leading. If you are alone in your home eating your dinner, then you are not leading then. Now, sometimes eating can be leading, like if you are a model for some pizza company, or and through the process of eating the pizza and how delicious it is, you are maybe attempting to influence people to eat the same brand of pizza. And in that case, that would be a situation of leadership. But if you are eating alone at home, that is not necessarily leadership, right? That is not leadership, even if you have been, or if you are in top positions of leadership. Teacher, that way, can also be a leader because the teacher is influencing the kid. Parents then can also be leaders as they are influencing the kid. So who is the leader here in this Avengers movie? Depending on who your favorite Avengers character is, you may say Captain America is the leader, or some of you may say it's Iron Man who's the leader, and some of you say it may be Captain Marvel, and so on and so forth. But we don't have Nick Fury's photograph here, but some of you may say that Nick Fury is the leader because he heads the organization. But ultimately, they are all leaders, right? In different situations, different person takes the lead. So remember, leadership is the process of influencing others. So yes, in certain situations, Nick Fury, in a very formal, organized setup, he is the leader who is heading the organization that has all these Avengers. And in certain situations, it's Iron Man who may be taking the lead and other Avengers are following him. In certain other situations, it may be Thor, or it may be Captain America, and so on and so forth. So leadership can be very dynamic. It need not be static with one person always leading and others always following. So that's also something that we need to keep in mind. Now let's come to the question of how leadership is related to or different from management. Leader versus manager. Are they same or are they different? Most of you, in your response to this question, emphasized a lot of differences between leadership and management. This is similar to what you will also see if you do a Google search on this question. Most of these differences tend to emphasize that managers are very directive. They tell you what to do. They avoid conflict. They are, very result oriented and so on and so forth. They are very reactive in their approach. Whereas leaders, they tend to be proactive. They tend to, instead of telling you what to do, they inspire you to do things. They empower you, or they challenge you. They have vision and so on and so forth. These are the two major distinctions that are drawn between managers and leaders. But is that accurate? That's something that we have to ask. So here are some differences that you listed between a leader and a manager. And it's something that is also seen in many textbooks, on the web, and so on and so forth. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, of course, but I just picked few points that you had highlighted. Leaders, they do the right thing, whereas managers, they do things right. Leaders, they guide, they help, they care for their followers. Managers, they are very directive. They tell them what to do. They are very controlling. They control the resources, who gets what, and so on and so forth. Leaders, they create vision for the organization. Where should the organization be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Whereas managers, they implement the vision. They carry out the orders of the top leadership of the organization. Now, this is something that many of you emphasize, that followers follow the leader because they want to follow the leader. Whereas in case of managers, they follow them because they have to follow them. So leaders have an inclusive style. They take everyone together in their influence process, whereas managers, they have a coercive style. They may sometimes use punishments and threats to get job done. Leaders, they are future oriented, similar to the vision point, whereas managers are focused on the present, the day-to-day activities of the organization. So, are these differences real differences? The best way to figure out if these distinctions are real is to go back to the definition of leadership. Now, how did we define leadership? We define leadership as the process of influencing others to attain some common goals, right? Now, if that's the case, then everything that is mentioned under the manager, are they not means of influencing people's behavior? They are, right? When the manager is telling you what to do, the directive approach. When the manager is controlling resources so that things can get done in a streamlined fashion. When the manager is communicating the vision of the top management to you, to the lower subordinates, is he not or is she not influencing the subordinates? When the manager is employing a coercive style, for instance, using punishment, or threats of punishment. It is, again, a process of influencing people, right? So even the focus being focused on the present, leadership, we didn't define leadership as something that is future oriented. No, we define leadership as the process of influencing others. So we may be influencing people to work or get things accomplished in the present. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is only in the long-term future. So this is the problem that we have when we make such distinctions between what leaders do and what managers do. These are not real differences. These are what I would call perceptual differences. There is a perception that has been created that leaders do these things and managers do the separate set of things. But that's not correct if we analyze things by the definition of leadership. Everything that we have listed under what managers do fall under the process of influencing others. So then we can't say that these differences are true differences. Moreover, there is a major problem with highlighting such differences. It's of course very simplistic, right? As I said, it doesn't fit our definition of leadership. So we are not being logically consistent here. Second problem is that it creates negative stereotypes about managers. Oh, I am a leader. I'm not supposed to be doing these directive, the present focus stuff. I am the one who is inspiring. That is problematic. It creates negative stereotypes about leaders. Leaders may then start seeing managing is something beneath them. We don't want that. Both what is listed under leader as well as manager, both these lists are important when it comes to leading, when it comes to being effective as leaders. So this is something that you always need to keep in mind. These are more perceptual differences rather than actual differences. Leadership includes influencing through whatever means that is necessary to achieve the common goal. And some of those things may be things that are typically ascribed to the role of manager. So these distinctions between management and leadership, it has been talked about by many thinkers and some noted leadership scholars. Cotter, for example, made that distinction also. He talked about management being about planning and budgeting, establishing agendas, setting timetables, allocating resources, organizing and staffing, which is providing structure, making job placements, establishing rules and procedures, and controlling and problem solving, which is developing incentive plans for your employees, generating creative solutions, take corrective action when things go wrong. Whereas leaders, they are focused on creating vision, setting big strategies, communicating goals, seeking commitment, and inspiring, energizing, and all that stuff, which you guys have also touched upon. But the same problem, right? This argument is fallacious because everything that has been listed under management here, these are all means of influencing people to attain some goals. Establishing agendas, that's how you are influencing followers' behavior, your subordinates' behavior. You're setting timetables, you're giving them goals by which they have to attain those goals. You allocate resources, and through that you motivate them to or you enable them to get the job done. So these are all influence processes. Through providing job placement, by establishing rules of what is correct way of doing, what is incorrect way of doing, by providing some structure, by giving them rewards, developing incentives. These are all different means of influencing people. So we cannot say that these are roles that only managers perform and these are roles that leaders perform. Everything that is listed under management would actually also come under leadership, because we define leadership as the process of influencing others to attain goals. These are all different means of influencing people. Now, I'm not saying that there are no differences between leaders and managers. There certainly are some differences, and we will touch upon those differences. But those differences are not based on the roles that you ascribed to them, that leaders have an inclusive approach and managers have a coercive approach, and so on and so forth. Those differences are not correct. Why? Because all the things that we listed under a manager are also ways of influencing people's behavior to attain the organization's goals. So we can't say that only leaders' behaviors are associated with influencing people to attain goals and not that of managers. So those are incorrect, logically incorrect differences. So what are the differences? Now, I would say that the differences are less. There is greater overlap between leader and manager than there are differences, but certainly there are some differences. One difference would be that leadership can exist outside formal organizations. So we typically see the role of manager only in organizations, but leadership can happen outside organizations, right? It can happen in the playground, as I was mentioning in that Survivor TV series example. Somebody emerging as a leader. Now, this person is not a manager technically because he has not been appointed to the position of leadership. This person emerged as a leader. So manager is an assigned leadership position. Leadership can be assigned as well as emergent. And we see a lot of emergent leadership outside organizations. We can see, of course, emergent leadership also within organizations. For example, on the shop floor, there may be a assigned formal, manager, but one of the employees may be more respected, and people may be seeking that person's guidance much more than that of the manager, probably because he is more technically competent, or maybe because they respect him because of his values, and so on and so forth. So yes, it is certainly possible that we may see this emergent leadership within organizations, but leadership can exist outside organizations. Managers exist only within organizations. And second important difference would be there are certain managerial roles, which do not involve the process of influencing people, right? Managers do not always manage people. Some managers, they have the title of manager, but they manage other things like finance, accounts. They may or may not have people working under them. If they have no one who reports to them, if they are not responsible for influencing people, if they are only managing some financial accounts, for instance, then at least that part of the job wouldn't be called leadership, because there is no influence process happening there where you are influencing others to attain some common goal. That's not happening. A finance manager who is only focused on managing the accounts would not be called a leader then, unless he is trying to influence somebody, right? So these are some differences that do exist between leaders and managers, but the distinctions in terms of that leaders do these things, whereas managers do these things. That is incorrect. Typically, in terms of roles, is incorrect. Now we come to the question of what is leadership effectiveness? Or in other words, when can we say that a leader is being effective? Or how can we say that a leader is being effective? So these are some of the responses that I got from you. I just picked a few. Now, some of your responses were more accurate and some a little less. I picked up some of the ones that were a little less accurate so that I can analyze them and you can get a clearer understanding about some of the misconceptions that we may have about leadership effectiveness. So, effective leaders are great communicators. They desire to inspire and know how to do it. They care about other people's success. They lead by example, invest in others, empower their employees, and they can handle big disasters in times of uncertainty. When a leader has great communication with the team, they can set goals with clarity. So what is mentioned here is accurate in terms of the importance of communication. I completely agree that communication, having great communication skills, can have a huge impact on leadership effectiveness. But communication is not the same as leadership effectiveness. Communication leads to this great communication leads to leadership effectiveness. In other words, sometimes you may have great communication happening, but still the leader is not being effective. We see similar kind of situation in the second example that I picked up. There are many ways to find out if a leader is effective or not. I believe if a leader has a clear vision and goal and knows what they want to achieve, they will be effective. And again, I agree that having a clear vision, having clarity about what goals they should work on, that will definitely improve the chances of the leader being actually effective. But having a clear vision is not the same as leadership effectiveness. You may actually have very clear vision about the future of the organization, and yet you may not realize it, and consequently then you are not being effective as a leader, right? Here another point that is made. I think you can tell if a leader is effective pretty early on. In terms of coaches for basketball, you can tell pretty early when talking to them. These coaches generally have a swagger or moxie about them, that they just have it. It is something you are not always sure what it is, but you can tell whether someone has it or not. So what this person is describing here is what we call charisma in my field. So some people are very charismatic. You can just tell that when you interact with these leaders. But again, charisma can help you be more effective as a leader. But charisma is not the same as effective leadership, right? For example, the basketball coach may be extremely charismatic, maybe the most charismatic coach the team has ever had, and yet fail to win any of the matches, or let's say win the major tournament. And in that case, the leader is not being effective, right? Okay, so I want you to have a clear distinction between what helps the leader being effective from what is leadership effectiveness. So we need to have clarity about what leadership effectiveness is first. And then, of course, everything that we will learn in this semester or in this course would be how can we then help be more effective in roles of leadership. So what you are describing is the how part. How can leaders be more effective? What Before we go to the how, we need to have clarity about what is effective leadership. So that's what we will focus on next. So what is leadership effectiveness then? Or in other words, how can we really say that a leader is being effective? There are many ways, and we will go through a few of them, and I will also emphasize on the ones that are really important. So the first way is attainment of goals. Remember, we define leadership as a process of influencing others to attain some common goals. So if those goals are not attained, if those goals were not achieved, then we can say that the leader was not effective, irrespective of how charismatic this leader was, irrespective of how great a communicator this leader was. If those goals were not attained, we will say that the leader was not effective, right? Similarly, we may have a leader who was not charismatic, but still succeeded in attaining the goals that was there for his team or for his organization. And then in that case, we will call that person to be an effective leader. So the first measure of, or the primary measure of leadership effectiveness is attainment of goals. In business organizations, we typically measure it on very objective terms, not always, but often we can measure the effectiveness of a leader from very objective parameters. Sales figures, for example, profits, increase in market share. So there may have been targets of increasing the market share by so and so percentage. Was that attained? Or did you actually start losing market share? If you lost market share, then we will say that you are not effective as a leader. And other measures like return on investment, return on assets, costs. In case of costs, it's reducing costs. For example, if you are leading a manufacturing setup, you may have goals of reducing the costs. So did you succeed in reducing the cost by whatever percentage goal that you had, increase in stock value, and so on and so forth. We may have different parameters for non-profit organizations, but we still will have some measures through which we would evaluate whether the leader is being effective or not. In case of non-profit organizations, for example, it could be the amount of money that you generated, funds for the, or the number of people you signed up, volunteers you signed up for the cause, things like that, right? So attainment of goals is the primary parameter based on which we evaluate leadership effectiveness. But that's not the only parameter. There are other ways that we evaluate leadership effectiveness as well. And the second most important parameter is followers' affective state. Affect means emotions. So the emotional state of the followers. Are they satisfied or are they dissatisfied? Are they disillusioned? Are they heavily stressed? Is there too much of absenteeism in the organization because of they being unhappy in the organization? Absenteeism could be an indirect measure, indirect but objective measure of followers' affective state. So going back to the example of the basketball coach. The basketball coach may have attained the goal of winning the major league tournament. But imagine this coach was a real jerk. He would mistreat the players. He would push them hard, but mistreat them. He wouldn't take care of them. And he would, of course, challenge them. And in that process, they succeeded in winning the tournament. But the players were all miserable. And this may not be as common in case of basketball, but definitely very common in business organizations. The organization may attain the sales targets, may attain the profit targets, but everyone working under this manager or leader is miserable because this person pushed them too hard. Now, can we say that the leader is still effective? We would say that the leader is effective, but only from the attainment of goals perspective, not from the follower's affective state perspective. So these are the two most important parameters based on which we evaluate leadership effectiveness. That followers should also be satisfied, that the followers are also happy. Sometimes you may see leaders being effective on one parameter but not the other. They may be effective in terms of attaining goals but not in terms of followers' positive affective state. Sometimes you will see it other way around. The leaders have very happy followers but they are not attaining goals. So these are the two most important parameters to keep in mind when we are talking about leadership effectiveness. There are other parameters as well. We will go through the others quickly. Third one is followers' attitudes or perceptions towards the leader. In other words, what do the followers think about the leader? Do they respect the leader? Do they admire the leader? Or do they hate the leader? So this is also a measure that is used in research about whether or not a leader is being effective. So if a leader is admired, if a leader is respected by his followers, then we would say that, hey, this leader is being effective. Whereas if the leader is hated by his followers, by his subordinates, maybe the leader is not as effective, or at least not effective on this parameter of followers' attitudes and perceptions. There are some other measures in terms of group characteristics. You could measure uh, the group characteristics, how cohesive is the group, how much of member cooperation we are seeing, is there a commitment to group goals, team efficacy, and so on and so forth. So uh, this is not as common as the first three, but nonetheless, these things can be measured, and then we can figure out whether or not the leader is being effective. There are many other measures. Change, for instance. Did the leader succeed in bringing about change in the organization? But this could be um, combined with attainment of goals, right? But of course, there is a distinction here. Attainment of goals are existing goals, whereas change is changing the goals. It can be even changing the goals. But you realize that sometimes change may be the goal. The CEO may have been put into the position to bring about change in the organization. So that then becomes similar to attainment of goals. Nonetheless, this is something that we see in organizations as well, a measure of leadership effectiveness. Another one is legacy. So here we are talking about long-term effects of the leader as opposed to the immediate short-term effects. So long after the leader is gone, are we going to still say that the leader was effective or not? So some of the presidents of United States or any other country for that matter, while they were in their presidentship role, it's possible that many people did not consider them as very effective. But 50 years down the lane, 100 years down the lane, we realize the kind of impact that they had on our lives. And we then may consider that they were extremely effective, or in the opposite direction, they were extremely ineffective. Many a times, leaders may be very effective while they were there in the organization, while they were existing in the, while they were holding the position of leading the organization. But after they retired, after they left the organization may fall apart. Then in that case, that would be an ineffective leadership, right? The legacy didn't stay, it just fell apart. So there are many measures of leadership, but the first two are the most important. Those are the two that you should never forget: attainment of goals and followers' affective state, which is how satisfied or dissatisfied they are. Now here's a question: successful career of a leader, can that also be considered as a measure of leadership effectiveness? When a leader gets promoted to higher positions of leadership, can we say that that is a measure of leadership effectiveness? Think about it. Well, in my field, we do not consider that a measure of leadership effectiveness. I will explain why in the next slide. There was a study that was published in 1989 by a researcher named Fred Luthans, who is a major researcher in our field. He was interested in finding out the different activities that managers perform in organizations. We have already discussed managers, if they are managing people, are leaders, right? So that's what he was focused on. And through his research, he finds out that there are broadly 4 categories of activities that leaders engage in. One is communication. They, at that point of time, there was a lot of paperwork form of communication, not so much of electronic communication, but they exchange information. So communication is one of the roles that managers are engaged in. Then there was another category of activities, which is planning, decision making, controlling. These are traditionally roles ascribed to managers, right? Planning, decision making, controlling. So they plan for their department or for their organization. They make decisions about what needs to be done. Controlling, we have already touched upon before. So those were another set of activities that real managers engaged in. Let me skip the third one for the timing and go to the fourth one. And the other big category of activities that they were engaged in was called, he called it human resource management. Now, these managers were not necessarily human resource managers. They were not necessarily HR managers, but the activities that they engaged in, Luthans called them human resource management because it involved managing people in terms of motivating them, reinforcing them, disciplining them or punishing them when they were doing things wrong, managing conflict, staffing, training, development. So all these activities he put under the broad category of human resource management. And then there was a fourth category, which is called networking. So managers also spent time interacting with outsiders. Outsiders, not necessarily customers, but people outside the organization who could benefit him. And they also spent a lot of time socializing with important people, politicking, engaging in politics and those kinds of stuff. So this he classified as networking. Now, he found something interesting. He found that there was a difference in the way effective managers engaged in these behaviors versus those managers who got promoted to higher positions of leadership. There was a difference in their activity pattern. So what was the difference? He found that the effective managers, the ones who were attaining goals and had happy, satisfied employees or subordinates, That's how we defined effectiveness, right? Those two parameters. So the effective managers, they invested a lot of time in communication, traditional management, and human resource management. That's where they invested the major chunk of that time. Effective managers. Whereas the successful managers, they had a different approach. They did invest some time in communication, traditional management, and human resource management, but they invested a disproportionately higher amount of time in networking, socializing with important people in the organization or outside the organization that could help them get uh, into higher positions. So that is the reason we make a distinction between effective leadership and successful leadership. Effective leadership, we define it in terms of attainment of goals and having satisfied subordinates, happy followers. Whereas successful leadership, we define in terms of getting promoted to higher levels of leadership. And this networking plays a huge role in becoming successful leaders. Now, I'm not saying that you should not aspire to be successful leaders. You should. You should aspire to be both effective as well as successful leaders. And I will touch upon some of the various things that you can also do to be more successful as leaders, because all of us would like to be more successful. I wouldn't say all of us. Most of us probably would like to be successful as well, not just effective, right? I will touch upon the things that you can do to be more successful as leaders later on. But do remember this distinction between effective leadership versus successful leadership. Finally, we will go over some of the key variables in leadership theories. Anytime that people talk about leadership, they only think about the leader. That is problematic because leadership does not exist in a vacuum. So there are three key variables that we always need to take into account when we are talking about leadership. Leadership happens at the intersection of leader, followers, and the situational variables or the contextual variables. So the interaction that happens between leaders and followers, and situational variables, context, and between the leader and context, all these three factors contribute to the better understanding of leadership. Now, it is true that certain theories tend to emphasize one over the other. Certain theories, for instance, tend to emphasize the leader aspect, the qualities of the leader, the skills of the leader, and so on and so forth. That helps in leadership effectiveness. But that's not all. There are other theories that focus on the follower aspect. What are some of the qualities of the follower that help in leadership effectiveness, for instance? And we cannot ignore the situational factors either. There are many theories that emphasize or focus more on the situational factors. In certain situations, a leader may be very effective, but the same leader may be ineffective, completely ineffective in another situation. So what are those situational factors, those contextual factors? For example, you may have been a leader in the army or in the Marines. Then, and you were very effective there as well. You attained all the goals and the people working under you were very happy and they respected you, all that stuff. Then you, after retiring from your job, you come and worked in the corporate sector, you may not be as effective there. You may be effective, but you may not be effective because the context has changed. The situation has changed, right? So anyway, I won't delve into too much of details right now because we will elaborate upon these factors in different theories. But do always remember that leadership happens when all these three factors are interacting with each other. So at least you as leadership students should not just be thinking about the leader when you are talking about leadership. You should also take into account followers and the contextual or the situational variables. Now, the theories that we will go through in this course, some of those theories will be focused on the intra-individual level, meaning factors within the individual, factors within the leader. Okay. So intra, like trait approach or the skills approach. What traits should the leader have? What skills should follow the leaders have? So these are intra-individual processes. Then there is the dyadic process. Dyad means two. So one leader, one follower, the interactional aspect of it. There is a theory that focuses only on the dyadic interaction between one leader and one follower. Then there are theories that focus at the group level. So group dynamics come into play. There are leadership theories that focus at organizational level processes like strategic management, strategic thinking, and so on and so forth. And we also have theories that span multiple levels, okay, individual level to dyadic level to group level to organizational level. So different theories have different levels of conceptualization, levels of analysis. Of course, there are many theories and we will not be able to go through all those theories, but we will go through some of those important theories, and those theories will span these different levels of analysis. Lastly, as I have already mentioned, some theories tend to be focused on the leader, some focused on the follower, some are more focused on the situation. So we see those differences. But two other parameters that we need to take into consideration are universal theories versus contingency theories. So universal theories tend to make recommendations about how you should lead that is supposed to be universal. In other words, that will be applicable to all leaders, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their race, irrespective of the culture where they're operating, or irrespective of the kind of organizations that they're leading. So those are called universal theories. Okay, so whatever it is that they are describing or prescribing would at least ideally be applicable to every leader. And then we have what are called contingency theories. These theories tend to actually emphasize the situational aspects more. The kind of recommendations that these theories make are not universal. They say that, well, X approach to leading will work in situation A, but X approach to leadership will not work in situation B, and so on and so forth. Similarly, Y approach will work really great in situation C, but not in situation A. And so these are contingency approach. The best approach to leading is contingent upon or is dependent upon certain factors. So these contingency theories try to identify the factors that impact the differences in effectiveness that we see across situations, across cultures, across other factors like gender or any other parameter. And lastly, I have already touched upon it, but we need to keep in mind that some theories are descriptive in nature. In other words, they describe the way things actually are. Okay, they may be making some prescriptions, but their primary focus is describing the way things are. Then there are prescriptive theories that are prescribing how you should lead. Uh, so descriptive theories tell you how leaders tend to lead, okay? Whereas prescriptive theories tend to tell you, they make prescriptions of how you should be leading. They make prescriptions about what will make you an effective leader. So we see these different kind of distinctions as well. So stay tuned for all these different types of theories that we will be going through. And thank you.